Japanese troops not leaving Taiwan because of their refusal to believe the war was over. Well, and the reason why they were informed that the war was over, JCROG 08, was because the peace treaty was signed at the Presidio military base where I worked in 1951 when America needed Japan as an ally in the Korean War. And at that point, the Japanese Navy, which had already been reconstructed as a massive coastal force, was remilitarized and redeployed in the Korean Peninsula because they were most familiar with the waters. And they were used in the most dangerous job of all, which was minesweeping. And that was put under the command of a Japanese admiral. So this was a Japanese command serving as an unrecognized ally in the Korean War of the United States. And because the United States needed Japanese industry to produce weapons that were being used in Korea, and the Japanese were indeed producing weapons that were being used in Korea, such as shrapnel bombs, which were being built out of the same tin from deconstructed warships that we saw in America as toy robots, as toy planes. The Japanese were using the same shrapnel on the other side of their factories on different assembly lines to build shrapnel bombs, which were deployed by American jets in Korea. The Japanese were also deploying their Navy as a minesweeper force for the United Nations forces. And again, under the command of a Japanese admiral. As for nukes not being used again, the current war in Iraq, which I served in Operation Desert Storm, has unleashed the largest amount of radioactive depleted uranium since the isolation of the uranium isotope in the days of the 1890s. So what we have today is a nuclear war. The Iranians, who are at war with the United States, who are sending insurgent troops into Iraq, know that this is a nuclear war because their troops burn their clothes every time they do a mission against U.S. forces. They burn their clothes not to hide their identities because they can easily melt into the swarm of other Middle Easterners who the Americans cannot tell apart. They burn their clothes because their clothes are saturated in depleted uranium. The American troops, however, are unaware that it's a nuclear war, of the fact that 44,000, that the radiological equivalent of 44,000 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons have been spread all over Iraq in terms of the use of depleted uranium. So the Americans suffer enormous carcinomas, radioactive damage chromosomally. As a matter of fact, I would refer you to Conspiracy Test, the documentary which specifically referred to the voluntary testing, not by the VA, which denied any form of testing chromosomally, but the voluntary testing that was undergone by Gulf vets who were suffering from Gulf War immunodeficiency syndrome from Operation Desert Storm, the operation I was in. And these vets who were chromosomally tested, it was found that they had more radioactive damage to their chromosomes than an adult who had spent the vast majority of his life undergoing chemotherapy. So that is how massive the radioactive damage is. That's how irreparable it is in terms of what's going on with the nuclear war that's being used today. It's not that nuclear weapons are not being used because they're too dangerous. They're simply being deployed in a different way at this point in history for area denial, so that no other nation on earth can effectively exploit Iraq's resources without massive decontamination. In terms of pro-Japanese propaganda, that there was no Holocaust, the response to JCROG is, as I stated in my interview with George Norrie, as I stated in my interview with Dr. Stanley Monteith, who you can look up on www.radioliberty.com, and you can download the audio archives concerning my interview with Dr. Stan Monteith regarding Japan and Pearl Harbor. The major reason for Japan's forced attack on the United States was because the United States was going to bomb Japan in order to close down their exploitation of essentially an Israel in Far East Asia, what is known today as the Jewish Autonomous Oblast. And as I mentioned on Dr. Stanley Monteith's show, as I mentioned on George Norrie's show, if you were to search engine, Google, the word Jewish Autonomous Oblast, you would see a nation-state between Manchuria and Russia that existed before the war. The Japanese sacrificed 20,000 troops to establish a homeland for the Jews in East Asia that were escaping from the Third Reich. As a matter of fact, this was done at Adolf Hitler's suggestion because he wanted to make Europe Judenrein, or rid Europe of its Jewish community. And as a result, what the Japanese did was they relocated as many as they could to East Asia. If you could turn that off for a minute. Yeah.